We are going to make a French seam sample, and then you will French seam the shoulder seam of your dress. You will be doing a French seam on the side seam of your dress also, but that's later. That's a few steps from now. I've chosen for the sample a fabric that has a print, and that is just, I could do it in muslin, and you can too, but the right and wrong side of the fabric is important on a French seam, and that's why I've chosen this, because there's a right side and a wrong side to the print, so you can see it a little better. All right, now typically when we make a seam, we put the fabric right sides together. But when we make a French seam, we're gonna start by putting the fabric wrong sides together. So how do you remember this? I make up these silly little, oh, I don't know, limericks. And this one is really politically incorrect, but I'm gonna do it anyways. So we remember this because it's a French seam and the French are always wrong. I'm just totally making it up just so you won't. So the French are wrong. So that's why we're putting this wrong sides together. So hopefully, or you may think of your own little limerick, but with a French seam, we start with our wrong sides together. So the French are always wrong, and we are going to sew that. We're planning for a 5/8 inch seam allowance because we're working with a commercial pattern. So we're going to start with a 1/4 inch, and I call it a skinny quarter. So I usually bump the needle over 1 click just to make sure that it's just a tiny bit less than a quarter. I'm going to the machine. My center needle position. Okay, but I'm going to be sewing this at a 1/4 inch, wrong sides together. So I'm going to use the edge of the right side of the foot to line up my fabric. And like I said, so here's centered. I'm going to do 1 click over. That's just to give me a little bit, smidge less skinny quarter, I call it. That way I don't have to do any trimming. And I'm sewing a 1/4 inch, seam allowance, regular stitch length, back stitch. This French seam gives you a completely encased, clean seam. It's super strong and it's super clean. All right, now what we're gonna do is come back to the iron and press that open. So you can start by finger pressing. Okay, so we have pressed open the skinny quarter, and now we're going to fold and press on that actual seam. You want to be right on the seam, and that's why it's very important that you press open that little 1/4 inch seam so that you can come back and press right on the seam that we made. Now you're ready to go back to the machine, and this time you're going to stitch 3/8 of an inch. So back to the machine, and I've pressed right on that little, right on the seam. It has to be precise. Now back to 3/8, drop the needle, back stitch, couple stitches, lock it, and off you go. 3/8 of an inch, back stitch, and come to the iron and press again. And you'll see now that on the inside we have a beautiful clean seam. And on the outside, I should say, on the right side, we have a beautiful clean seam. Just looks like any regular seam, but look how nice this seam is. It's all encased. It's beautiful finish. No overlock necessary. It's not going to fray. And it is super strong. It's a very strong seam.